highest GDP per capita in Africa. Well, that's due to its vast natural resources and relatively small population. Libya has the largest proven oil reserves in Africa, an estimated 44 billion barrels. But experts say there could be plenty more oil. Only 25% of the country's surface territory has actually been explored. Well, the bulk of that oil is exported to Europe and North America. Libya is Europe's single largest oil supplier. Some studies say Western Europe gets a quarter of its oil from Libya. Well, to manage the oil revenues, Libya set up a sovereign wealth fund to invest those assets. According to the Libyan Investment Authority's director, the fund has $70 billion at hand to invest. So where is all this wealth? Well, perhaps to help us answer some of those questions, joining us now in the studio, Ibrahim Jibril. He's a Libyan political activist. Thanks so much for coming in. Where is the money going then?
This is the $64,000 question.
Well, 70 billion if you look at the assets which apparently they have at hand.
Let me add to the statistics that you just mentioned at the front end. About 30% unemployment in Libya. 40% of the people live below poverty line. This is now a country theoretically has the highest per capita income. So the question is indeed, where are the billions? Well, some of the reports that we know, or at least we hear, is that a lot of that money is tucked away in Swiss bank accounts and other bank accounts for Gaddafi himself and his sons and his daughter and his closest associates and friends. Other than that, definitely that money has not made its way to the infrastructure of the country, to the hospitals, to the universities, to the schools, to the people who need it and deserve it. They have not seen it for more than 30 years or so.
Looking at the vast sovereign wealth fund which Libya has at hand, does that explain the reluctance of some countries, particularly maybe in Western Europe, to kind of speak out in a very forthright way about what's going on in Libya?
Potentially. The West particularly has not really acted in the best interest, or it doesn't look after the best interest of the people of any country. They have their own interest to look after.
And they're going through a financial crisis. Why would you want to make a sovereign wealth fund unhappy?
Yes. So why would you care about a Libyan who's getting shot in Benghazi when you need to care about how much your return on investment is? But potentially, we're hoping actually that some of these countries will deliver on their lecture that they lecture us usually about human rights and so on, that they will at least act in the same way that they speak one of these days. Can
the money be a factor in the government's ability to control, to pacify, to please people and get them off the streets?
It's too late for that, Sami. This is now, the people in the streets of Libya have crossed the point of no return.
But it's mainly happening in the east. Any sign that the government's control is really cracking here nationwide?
It hasn't really just happened in the east. We know for a fact today that it is in every city of the country. It has perhaps delayed a little bit in the west because of heavier crackdown, but now it's on the streets of all cities in Libya, east and west, south and north, everywhere.
Is Libya different from Tunisia and Egypt in the sense that Gaddafi does have strong support amongst some people or some sections of society, doesn't he?
We need to qualify that. Gaddafi has a very close circle around him. This is not necessarily a vast number. He has some small circle around him that have their best interest in the fact that he stays in power. Otherwise, they lose. But beyond that, that diminishes very quickly in an exponential fashion. Rather quickly as you come out of that circle, which is tens, not thousands, not hundreds, but tens of people. Beyond that, there are opportunists here and there, like in any other society.
All right, thanks so much for coming in and talking to us.
Pleasure to be here.
Let's go back to Pearl Roundabout, that's in Bahrain now, and we can talk about some of the developments going on there. Robert Fisk, Middle East correspondent for the UK's independent newspaper, joins us from there live. You know, it would have been unthinkable, Robert, just a few weeks ago to imagine protests against a monarch or head of state in the Arabian Gulf. How important is this, not only for Bahrain, but for the rest of the region?
Well, you see, there were a few uprisings here, particularly among the Shiite community, in the past, but we reporters didn't rush out here and report it then, and then we never saw anything like this. I think this is much more important, actually, for Saudi Arabia than it is for Bahrain. You know, I think the Saudis must be very, very worried in Riyadh that up in Dhahran, which is a predominantly Shiite area of Saudi Arabia, there are going to be copycat protests with good reason against the Saudi government. Here, of course, it is comparatively peaceful if you compare even the security forces to Egypt, although they turned out to be a rabble a couple of nights ago. And one of the things you have to remember is that this is not Egypt, this is not Libya, this is not Yemen. This is a quite separate, almost a civil rights demand that is coming from the largely Shiite community here, these protesters. But as I say, it's a very important thing, not just for the Bahrainis, and of course the Bahraini ruling family is Sunni, but it's very important for the Saudis. And you know, we are well aware that the Saudis were pushing the Al Khalifa family here to take very strict measures against the protesters. And in the end, to their great credit, it was indeed the Crown Prince, who's Deputy Supreme Commander, who pulled the army away and ordered the police out, which in fact ensured that the people could come back here and that this would almost turn into a jamboree, what might have been a bloodbath. So that was one good step the king made. The next question, of course, he promises all these reforms, as the Egyptians have been promised. Well, we'll wait to see if they actually come about.
Let's talk a little bit about what's going on right across the region. We've seen protest movements emerging all the way from Morocco to Bahrain and well, even promised protests in Tehran today, we're hearing. But what sort of new regional order might emerge once the dust settles in North Africa and the Middle East?
Well, the first thing you have to notice that with a few tiny exceptions, this is a secular, classless rising of people. This is not Islamic. There isn't a single Islamist flag here. I didn't see one. I saw just one out of millions of flags in Egypt. So all this nonsense about, oh, we're worried about the Muslim Brotherhood, extremist imams and so on, I think it's a load of old nonsense. This is a secular uprising. But one of the things I think that I've seen happen, I've been in this region for 36 years, far too long, you might say. And one of the things I've noticed is that when I came to this region, whether I was in Bahrain, where they had a very nasty secret police back in the 70s, run by a former special branch policeman from Britain, of course, there was torture, and everywhere throughout the region, Egypt, both under Sadat, Mubarak and so on, people were frightened. What's happened now is that people have lost their fear. Arabs have lost their fear. And when you lose your fear, you cannot be re-injected with it. The whole situation changes, and from then on, the people who have power have either got to give some of it away or have got to go. And that, I think, is what's happening in the region. This doesn't include the issue of Israel, which I'm happily leaving out at this point.
Well, it's always good to get your thoughts. Thanks, Robert Fisk, right from the heart of one of those hotspots in Bahrain. Well, it seems that Chinese authorities are also getting a bit concerned about the wave of protests in the Arab world. Police presence has been stepped up, it appears, in response to a mysterious online call for protests. Arrests of activists have also increased. One man was stopped by police after he placed a white jasmine flower at the planned protest site in Beijing. Well, early results from Uganda's presidential poll suggest the incumbent, Yoweri Museveni, is headed for a big win. Provincial results from nearly all the polling stations show he has 68% of the vote. A victory for Museveni would extend his 25-year rule by another 5 years. Mohamed Adow is in the Ugandan capital, Kampala.